Welcome to the podcast. It's the worst territory in the world. Personalities, history, and other stories. We know you're craving for more knowledge. Let the champions get their glory. It's the worst territory in the world.
Hello and welcome to another edition of The Worst Territory in the World. Of course, we cover the Central States territory in professional wrestling history, then and now, mostly centered around Kansas City, Missouri. I am your host, Chris Goff. My partner in crime, Gabe Miller, not here for this episode, but nevertheless, it was going to be a long episode, I knew, because this was going to be an interview with my longtime friend, Randy Burch. Randy has been a longtime Kansas City DJ on radio. He became ultra status in Kansas City when he was the MC or play-by-play guy at the Woodlands Racetrack, which was a huge deal in Kansas City. If you lived around here, you knew when the Woodlands came in. Came in the early 90s, and it was a horse racing and dog racing track, and it provided a huge entertainment complex for the Kansas City area. And Randy, as he'll tell you in this interview, was a guy that basically didn't really want to work there, but tried out and became the voice of the racetrack. And everyone in Kansas City knows Randy Burch because of that. But I digress. Randy spent the last 20 years of Bob Geigel's life going to lunch with him every Tuesday, and he had a great time spending countless hours with Bob, getting all the great stories that Bob would give him from all the former Kansas City wrestlers that would have been so great to be a fly on the wall for a lot of these stories. But I knew Randy would be an awesome interview to listen to his stories about Bob and his thoughts on growing up in Iowa. So he got to see a lot of these guys on television anyway. But once he came to Kansas City, he got to be great friends with not only Bob Geigel, but Bulldog Bob Brown, Rufus R. Jones, and Mike George, who all worked at the Woodlands Racetrack. That's how I got to know these guys. When I was a young kid, I went there with my grandfather and met all these awesome pro wrestlers that I had heard about for so many years. And, that started off my relationship with Bob Geigel when I was just a small teenager. Anyway, Randy Burch, great interview. He talks a lot about professional wrestling and also a lot about the Woodlands Racetrack. So if you're from Kansas City, you'll get a double whammy here with historical thoughts on both those things. But without further ado, here's my friend, Randy Burch.
It's the worst territory.
I am joined now by a longtime friend of mine, but he was a longtime radio personality in Kansas City and, longtime voice of the Woodlands Racetrack that I grew up in with my grandfather. And he's now the owner of BigJackpotBetting.net. His name is Randy Burch. Randy, thanks for joining.
Yes, Chris, it's a delight to be here today, and I want you to know one thing.
What's that?
I bet I met your granddad, and you realized at a young age what was beautiful about the Woodlands. It was a social event.
It was.
Your granddad would talk about that your whole life. You'd go out there and you'd meet people. I knew the new waitresses. I knew all the cooks. I knew everybody. All the players. I go from table to table, and it was it was like a little city. It's like a social, living in a small town. It was wonderful.
No, it was. It was, and for those of you not in Kansas City that didn't grow up with the Woodlands, that was before any of the casinos were in Kansas City. It was the first gambling place in Kansas City, and it was a dog track and race and horse track, and it's gone now.
Yeah.
But for years, Randy was the voice, and everyone knew Randy, and that is how Randy. That's where you got to meet Bob Geigel and all the guys that wrestled in Kansas City very well.
Oh yeah. We had all the sports folks would come out one time. I met. I hear I had been in radio 20, 30 years at that point, and now all these people I interviewed with standing behind a microphone were suddenly my friends. Whitey Herzog would come up to the booth out there. We had people that were Rick Sutcliffe would come every Saturday night. And, the Minnesota Twins would come to town. Tom Kelly owned Greyhounds, and he'd be up upstairs in the suite up there. That's where I met the late Kirby Puckett and all of those people. It was just it was a wonderful experience. And, I have nothing against casinos. I think they're wonderful. I do voice work for them and podcasts for them across the country, but they don't have the social element. There's not people rooting for each other. there's not people having fun, interacting with each other. That was, but they serve a purpose. They do a great job too. But it doesn't have the social element, and the people. Bob Geigel was the first security guard they hired at the Woodlands who was in wrestling. He brought in the late great Rufus R. Jones and Bulldog Bob Brown, who used to wrestle with for years here in town, and then Mike George came in, and old wrestlers would come back to the racetrack because Bob was the central promoter. So whenever there was an old wrestler that would come to town, whether it was Danny Little Bear or who was ever visiting, would all look up Bob because Bob was like their godfather. He was the guy who booked matches for them. So they would come, and Bob's a great guy, so they would come visit all the time, and that's where I met Andre the Giant. In fact, the late Andre the Giant I met at the Woodlands. I mean, just the stories they would tell about the matches and stuff. With Bob, it was always like, once you're my friend, you're my friend. And every Tuesday, and I left the Woodlands in 1996 when I was working too many hours and cutting back, and I started doing some PA for the Kansas City Chiefs, so I was doing all these things. But Bob would stay every Tuesday. Randy, when are we going for lunch? Where are we going to lunch next week? That's what he would do. And so, ironically, when Bob passed away in 2015. His family picked his favorite restaurant in North Kansas City, and Harley Race was there, and all of Mike George, all the old wrestlers. We had a lunch, and we all started telling Bob Geigel stories, and we laughed our rear ends off, cried, and went home. And
he was a great guy. He was beloved, but everyone that knew Bob loved Bob Geigel.
Oh yeah, and we would, on Saturday nights, the place would be packed. If you ever came out on Saturdays, you couldn't move. I mean, I had a guest list on Saturdays between races. The gal at Wilco would call me up, say, "Randy, do you know this person? They want to get a free pass upstairs." Say, "Yeah, I know that person." And I got if I didn't know him, I'd say, "Yes, I knew him," just to get it done with. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
sure.
So
but Bob Geigel and I every Saturday night would sit down there and visit in the security guard post, which was right to the left of the entrance, so the main entrance. So we'd sit and laugh our asses off about the stories I made up every night and the stuff that it was a carnival there every night. And one night I went in, there was a hole in the wall, and I said, "What the hell happened here?" Bob said, "Well, a guy got a little too rambunctious, and he started yelling at people, and I warned him. I just threw him through the wall."
I mean, he could do it. That guy was still even at 80-some years old. The guy's hand was the size of a full.
Oh, yeah.
It was a catcher's mitt. It was.
Oh, he was unbelievable. He called me in the booth about stuff. What I had at the racetrack, the reason I knew what was going on at the racetrack is the employees would call me. Somebody would win a lot of money, and the security. I knew everybody there, so I knew everything that was going on all the time, and I'd start talking about people, and suddenly they realized, listening, he's talking about me, and he knows what I just did. One Saturday, Bob Geigel calls me up, and he says, "Randy, you never guess what happened." I go, "What's that?" He goes, "Oh, first of all, he always said his name, even though he didn't have to say his name." He said, "Hey, Bob Geigel." And I'd say, "Hey, Bobby." He'd say, "You aren't going to believe this." He said, "I went down to the bathroom, and a lady is sitting dead on the floor. She's I said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. What happened?" He said, she was doing drugs and freebasing. So I found out who her boyfriend was up at the Kennel Club." He said, "Now, are you sitting down, Randy? Are you ready for the rest of this stuff?" I said, "Yeah, I'm sitting down, Bob." He goes, "I get up there and I find this guy." And the guy said, "Yeah, I just met her last night." He said, "And I'll be down in a minute." He said, "Are you ready for this?" And I go, "Yes." He said, "I'll be down after I bet the Daily Double."
Oh my God! I mean, you probably have way more of those stories that happen on a weekly basis, I'm sure.
It was just a wonderful. Rufus R. Jones had the Ringside Restaurant. He opened up at 23rd and Vine, and I was single at the time, so people were trying to set me up with their daughters, and I said, "I don't want to." I was working like 80, 90 hours a week. I didn't have time for myself, more or less, another person.
Sure.
And so Rufus says, "Randy," he said, I'm opening up. I got my liquor license. I'm opening up Sunday night. Come on out Sunday night after the races. I said, I don't know, Rufus. I got to do morning radio on Monday. I don't know if I can. Oh, yes, you can. Get your ass over there after the Sunday night. So we get done with a Sunday matinee at 5 o'clock. I go to Rufus's place. It's packed, and he has food everywhere, and he's passing out free beer. And of course, who's going to pass up any free beer and food? He keeps giving me food, and he introduced me to people. And I'm dancing all night. I'm the only white person in there, I believe. And not that it bothers me. It was so much fun. And then Rufus said, "Don't you have a morning show to do?" It was like, so I stayed up all night, and I went from ringside to KFKF and did the morning show.
Oh, damn. Well, I think being in broadcasting, I've definitely had nights like that, especially on the road, where you just what's sleep?
I did during the World Series. I stayed up all night. I interviewed drunks in Westport. They were turning over cars, and I went back to KLSI and did the morning show. Spliced all the people together. All the people I interviewed, spliced them all together. Did the morning show at 5 o'clock. I did that. You think about that in your life, and you think, man, that was sure fun, even though you stayed up all night. And it's just wonderful memories like that. Somebody told me I should write another book. I wrote a book about the Woodlands that ended up, you were nice enough to do a TV show, Fun on the Run.
Oh, I love that book because, I mean, it obviously reminds me of the good old days of that. And
you were
a front row seat for that.
Yeah, it was great. It was great fun. And I really thought you did a fabulous job in Fun on the Run. I mean, you captured what it was really about. And I really thought it might change lawmakers' mind to give us a decent tax rate, but it was all baked in. The casinos had the lawmakers bought, so it wasn't going to change. But anyway, we sure gave it a good try. It was a great show.
You were a huge advocate for the Woodland. If anyone doesn't know, I used to work for this station here in town called Metro Sports, and I did a bunch of little documentaries with very little budget, but the best thing I could do is just go interview anyone I could find that would talk to me about it, try to find some B-roll and pictures and put some music to it and try to put something on the air.
Great.
And that's what Fun on the Run was about the Woodlands, because at the time they were still trying to get the Woodlands back, possibly open up again, and since then it's been demolished. But at the time we thought, let's try to do as much as we could.
It just breaks. What breaks my heart are the people that live in Kansas City, Kansas. I got to know a lot of them, like all the guys at the GM Ford plant would always come out to the racetrack. And what has happened is the politics of it all. First of all, voters passed slot machines at the Woodlands in 2007. There's supposed to be 2,300 slot machines in there. That's under state law.
Sure.
It was passed. It was passed by voters, 82% of the voters. And then Kansas comes in because we had some corrupt lawmakers that were bought by the casino folks, and they doubled the tax, 60% for the same slot machines. The casinos pay 22% for. So, of course, nobody's going to do business like that.
Not at all, no.
They taxed them out of business. And the sad part of it is the people that can least afford it on the east side of I-435 are all paying for the freebies that they get on the other side of the freeway. And their property taxes, of course, have gone through the roof because the Woodlands are bringing millions of dollars every year. Millions of dollars. Yeah. Even when we didn't have great crowds, we still were simulcasting and off-track money.
Yeah.
God bless the people that have the trucking place that's there now, but the Woodlands would make more than an hour than they make in a month.
Sure. And I talked to we talked to Schatz Duncan last couple shows, and she is the daughter of Bob Geigel, and we talked about how, and you can give me more stories about this because I know you checked in with them and ate lunch with them all the time, but I mean, I could not believe that Bob Geigel continued to be a security guard at the Woodlands until basically he couldn't do it anymore, which meant he was in his high 80s, basically.
He was in his high 80s. I'd go out and visit him. Teresa would make him a Christmas package every year, and he'd have to come to the gate and unlock the gate, and then you'd go in the office and you'd visit with him. Bob was a hunter, a rabbit hunter.
Yeah. And
Bob said, "Hey, Randy, you want me to? Do you like goose?" And I never ate goose in my life. I said, "No, I don't think so, Bob." He said, "Well, I got some geese out back." He said, "I'll shoot you a goose." We're walking back, and there were geese walking in the back of where the dogs used to be. And it was sad, but what I'll never get over, and I've never really made this public before, but I do know this because I was involved. I did Bob's obituary for his wife, and the night I found out he died, he broke his hip. He fell and broke his hip while he was at the Woodlands in the security. And of course, they had like 6-hour shifts for several years. There's only the general manager there and security guards because they surely Kansas is going to give us an equal tax, which they never did. So Bob fell, and he was there for a long time before somebody found him.
Oh, that's horrible.
And he died. And I will tell this to the corrupt lawmakers: you can live with yourself for what you did to the Woodlands, but what you did to Bob Geigel, I won't forget that anytime soon. Anytime soon. And,
his daughter told us about his broken hip, and I had no idea about that until she said that.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, I mean, you can live with that and be corrupt and take people's money, but there are many things that happened because of that. And he was a good person, and he shouldn't have died that way. I get emotional about this stuff, but it goes. You could take my job away by all of this. I ended up benefiting from all of it because now I own a business because one of my players set up an online business. You hurt a lot of people by taking their employment and taking their lives away from them, but you literally took his life away. And I won't. And I haven't told anybody that outside of the Geigels know it. Teresa, my wife, knows it, but I think I can definitely say so. Congratulations, guys! You did a great job. I hope you live with your corruption, and what you did to Bob Geigel is unforgivable. Unforgivable.
I agree. I mean, he was as a pillar of the community up there as well.
But that's the way people are now. Oh well, I always got when I explained the Woodlands tax to people, they'd say, "Oh well, all those employees will find something else to do." And I'm like, "Well, you better hope your business isn't the next one that's taxed out of business because they don't like you. You could be the next one."
Yeah.
But that's everybody's attitude. Everybody's attitude. Well, it doesn't affect me, so that's fine.
That's true.
If you are in Kansas City, it does affect you. Your property taxes are the highest in the state. It does affect you. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I sure miss Bobby. I talked to Scotts and Michaela at different times, and I loved their mom. Bob would have people. I went up to his house several times. We had lunches together, and he was a great guy, and he really, like a lot of people, when the Woodlands went, it took their life away. It took their life. That was their central meeting place. That's where their friends were. It took it just did that. But hey, life goes on, and I've gone on to bigger and better things, and everybody else does. But
well, I've always enjoyed. I've enjoyed talking to you about all the, through the years that we've been together at Metro Sports or this or just seeing you out and about. But I enjoy talking all these stories about you. But this podcast is called The Worst Territory in the World because people like Ric Flair always said negative things about Kansas City, and it's sort of tongue in cheek because the people that grew up in Kansas City and watched the Central States Territory, they loved it. And I know you're an Iowa guy like Bob.
Yeah.
When you were a kid, did you how much wrestling did you watch? Did you know these guys when you were growing up?
I knew them on television every Saturday. They were on Channel 7, KWWL in Waterloo. My brother and I watched them. I watched Bulldog Bob Brown. I watched Bob Geigel. The characters were just beautiful. I mean, you had one person that would play the bad guy, another play the good guy. Then I went up to Minneapolis when I went to college, and every Saturday night, me and my dorm buddies would go to downtown Minneapolis, and that's where Greg Gagne was based.
AWA.
And we would watch. I saw Nick Bockwinkel there. I saw the late Chris Taylor, the Iowa State. He was
Olympian, right?
Yeah, he was Olympian, and I saw him do the kaplash on Nick Bockwinkel one night. The ring about caved in, and they had little Tokyo Joe there one night, and this is we're sitting in the second row at the Civic Auditorium downtown Minneapolis, and my buddies and I are drinking beer, and we're sitting there watching Tokyo Joe. This lady behind us said, "He's got something in his pants. He's got something. He's got a foreign object in his pants." and she's standing up in front, and she's bouncing up and down and just hysterical. Tokyo Joe gets to the top rope, and he says, "Sit down and shut up, you fat pig."
You can't do that now.
And
You're
there's
canceled.
I have beer running up my nostrils.
Oh, I loved the trash talk. I would trash talk, and then them trashing, talking trash back, which is always the best. And
Bulldog Bob Brown, the thing with they had the twins,
Murdy and Gertie Height, yeah.
Yes, they would be at ringside, and they just hated. They throw hairpins at Bob, and they get so mad at him. And Bob would tell them to go wash their faces and get away from me. And it was just, I know these two wouldn't mind me telling you this story. They both asked Bob Geigel and Bulldog, but
it's not the Bill Wilson story, is it?
No, the Bill Wilson stories. That's so convoluted.
It's classic though. No matter
it is it's just the best. Have you told your listeners this story?
Well, Shots retold it on the show because
it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
But the first story I'm thinking about is Bulldog used to like to pick girls out he'd like to meet that are in the audience, and maybe set up a little rendezvous later. And
Sure.
he's a single guy at the time, so
Normal.
Hey, why not? These people are my fans. So anyway, he picks out this gal, and Bob Geigel was his wingman, and they had a little rendezvous between matches. And Bob Geigel watched the door, and Bulldog Bob Brown went in the restroom with this gal, and they're getting a little frisky together. And all of a sudden, there's a ping, like something fell on the floor. And Geigel said, "Brown, are you all right?" and Bulldog says, "Yeah, damn it." And Bob Geigel opens up the door, and the woman had a wooden leg that fell on the floor.
Oh my God! What are the odds?
We get into them about that Bulldog forever. I mean, they had some, but the Bill Wilson story. Bill Wilson was a promoter of wrestling, and Bill Wilson, his wish was when he passed away was he wanted his urns to be scattered at Memorial Hall, and Bob Geigel had his urns, as I understand. And he had it in his garage and kept forgetting to do something with it. And finally, Vera said, "Bob, this is really getting spooky. Let's get rid of Bill Wilson."
Of course, as any wife would.
So Bill, first of all, he thought he wanted his family to do it. So Bob shipped his urns to his family. That's the first thing he wanted to do. So Bob's wrestling in St. Joe one night as a promoter. And he gets a FedEx package. Bob, there's a FedEx package. And it was Bill Wilson's family sent the urns back to Bob in a jar. So finally, on a Sunday, they're at the swimming pool. And Geigel with his daughters said, let's go get rid of Bill Wilson once and for all. So they got in the car, they drove over to Memorial Hall, and they sprinkled his urns finally out of the yard in the steps of Memorial Hall. He says, "There you go, Bill. See you later."
And then Shots said that that grass was never greener after that.
It was never greener.
I know, that's such a classic Kansas City wrestling story. So talk about Memorial Hall, because that building is like, if you've never been to Kansas City, the building is just so awesome and a throwback, because they're not going to spend that much money and that much marble, and just the lobby alone is beautiful.
It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful place, and we had Bulldog Bob Brown's funeral there.
Oh, really?
The place was packed. Bob Geigel calls me, and we go out there, and Bob is the MC, and he gets that, and people start telling stories about Bulldog up there in the play. There's a lot of people there, and Bob says, "Now I don't want you folks to feel bad about Bulldog dying." He said, because he wouldn't want it that way. He'd want you to be happy about everything. So he says, "I put together some memories of Bulldog," and Bob hits this VCR tapes, and it shows Bulldog doing all of his crap with the announcers in the ring, and how he was hanging on the fence. And we all left there just dying laughing. Just laughing.
But based on what I've heard about Bulldog Bob Brown, that's the way he would have wanted it. I mean,
it's the way he wanted it. Yeah.
what, can you tell me about him? Because the two guys, and I never got to meet. I did get to meet Roger Kirby and obviously Bob Geigel and Harley Race, but I never got to meet Bulldog Bob Brown and Rufus R. Jones. And Shocks told us a story about Bulldog where, and I think you saw it in the documentary because I think Bob talked about it, but like they'd bring him to like Thanksgiving and he would just like crap over all their food, saying like, "This is horrible." Was that him in a nutshell?
He was. You didn't know the classic way you knew a Bulldog would like you is if he gave you crap all the time. He gave me crap endlessly. Randy, you're too loud. I'm trying to relax down here and all this "Here Comes Woody" stuff. You're too loud. You're making these people crazy. And all of it. I mean, he was if he gave you a ration, if he didn't spend any time with you and didn't talk to you, he didn't like you. You knew he liked you when he would needle you all the time. And I remember at Rufus R. Jones' funeral, it was the Christ the King Church. It was on a Saturday, and it was in November, and Bulldog Bob Brown is at one end of the casket, and Bob Geigel's at the other end, and they're carrying Rufus, who was a big man, down these steep steps, trying to load him in the hearse. And Geigel is at one side. He says, "Bulldog, are you okay?" Because it looked like Bob was going to pass out. I mean, it looked like he didn't know if he was overcome that his friend was dying. And you would think that he would say, "Oh, I feel terrible that Rufus is dying, and this is the last time." You thought it was something emotional. No. Bulldog yells out. We're right in the middle of all these people, and Bulldog yells out, "Damn, Rufus is heavy." Bulldog was just a beautiful. I had a situation where and I was pretty well known at this time of the year in the 90s because I was doing the "Here Comes Woody" 9 times a week. It was television. It was the highest rated show at 10 o'clock called The Woodlands a week, which was on channel 62. And so I couldn't go anywhere at that point, too many places, without someone asking me to say, "Here comes Woody," and all of this. So whenever I would go somewhere, there was always someone that wanted me to do something. So one time I got a shot I had an allergic reaction to a shot for a little tick I had in my jaw, and it just sent me into, almost like a depression. And anybody who knows me knows that I'm happy-go-lucky every day.
Oh yeah,
I've never been depressed, but I suddenly didn't want to eat. I didn't want to go anywhere, and I was by myself. And so anyway, I had one guy said, "Well, just stop taking that medicine they gave you for jaw tick," and I was fine in like 2 days. But anyway, word got out that I might have been having depression, or that I was going nuts, when in fact I just had an allergic reaction to a shot. So I get to the racetrack, and there's Bulldog one night. He says, "You better go home." He says, "You look depressed to me. You aren't going to be any good tonight. You better go home."
Well, I mean, look, I can relate to that because most of my friends, I talk that way to them as well. So, I mean, that is a true sign of camaraderie.
That was him every day. That was him every day. If that was Bulldog, and he was. I mean, there was a time one night Geigel said they were going to go down and wrestle in Wichita, and Bulldog thought he was having a heart attack in the car on the way to Wichita on I-35. And he said, "Bob, you better take me to the hospital or something." He thought he was dying, having a heart attack. Here he had passed some kidney stones. So he passes the kidney stones, Geigel says, and he said, "We better get you back to Kansas City and cancel this." And he goes, "No, we're going." So we passed kidney stones in the hospital on the way into Breslau that night.
Gee, I mean, you hear so many stories like that of that era. Nowadays, they get off for a month, but now, back then, it was like, "No, I want to get my draw from the night." I mean, that was how it was.
There were stories. What Tom Andrews, who's a great friend. God, I haven't seen Tom in a long time. He lives up north in Excelsior.
He actually has passed away.
He has.
I didn't know that because I was going through the sort of the lineup of the documentary, and I mean,
I'm so sorry.
There's so few people still around, and he passed away in the last handful of years. Yeah.
Well, I talked to Mike George, so he's still around. I know that. I talked to him all the time.
We had Mike George on here, and he is still working security at 7th Street Casino, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah. Oh, I do too. He stayed with it. He's a great guy. But Tom, one night they were wrestling downtown and he and Andre the Giant went down to Denny's, which is still there in downtown Kansas City, to eat afterwards. And Andre the Giant, he said, "I'd like five." He lifts up his hand like he'd like five, and the waitress says, "Oh, number five on the menu." And Tom Andrews pulled her aside and said, "No, he'd like five entrees."
I know. Yeah, the stories of Andre's eating and drinking are off the charts. They really are.
Oh, so the stories were just, and sadly, I'm in my 60s now, and Bill Grigsby, who used to announce the race, wrestling, used to tell me all these great stories at the racetrack. They passed, and Bob Geigel's passed, and Rufus R. Jones, and Bulldog, but they were great people. And you did such a great job, Chris, on Casey on the Mat. That was a fabulous, fabulous capturing of an era that people. It's hard to explain to young people in their 20s the excitement every Thursday night that would take place in Memorial Hall, or the excitement at the Woodlands. The excitement. I mean, I literally, when I call a race, there were 6,000-7,000 people there. We had 7 million people in 5 years.
Yeah,
came to that racetrack.
Amazing.
And when I would call the race, I go, "Hee!" and before I could get Woody out of my mouth, it was like the sound of the people coming through the floor. The anticipation was unbelievable.
You had a great gimmick. You're like a wrestler announcer in that way. You had your gimmick was the "Here Comes Woody," and everyone, that was your calling card, and you became known for it. And everyone over the age of like 40 knows that.
Yeah. And I sit here and I tell my grandkids all the time, I've got a wall of broadcasting plaques at Missouri Broadcasters or whatever. a wall, and all I'm ever known for is 3 words: "Here comes Woody."
Well, that's all it takes. You just need one good catchphrase, and the rest is under.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. I did it. I literally did it. I did it at a funeral in the parking lot to entertain some people from there. I did it at wedding receptions. I did it. I mean, for some reason, it always made people laugh. It made them feel good. So I just kept, And that was when the Woodlands closed. I realized that was the end of that. But you know what ended up happening with all of that, because of the fact that we were on the simulcasting on the dish, yeah. I became more popular at other places almost than I was at the Woodlands.
Oh wow!
So when they set up this, when Jimmy Smith at Track Data, who loved my work, set up this chat room and did contracts with racetracks, everybody said, "Oh yeah, Randy, we know Randy. Yeah, that's fine." So everybody knew me, even though I didn't know them at other places. That's really so. That place, to say that place has been central in my life. Oh my God.
Yeah,
and I mean, it's something I didn't even want to do. Something I didn't even want to do. That I just decided on a lark when somebody asked me to come out to try to do it, and gee whiz.
Well, it's anything new like that, Randy. You didn't know.
Yeah.
You go in the world from morning radio or whatever to go do something like that. I mean, and now
I've been part of 3 startups in my life. One was the Woodlands here, and a couple of radio stations. I will tell you, the magic of that is since you're not compared to anyone else, there's no one to compare you to. You can basically do whatever you want.
Sure.
And and the magic of it is just been so blessed, and but the wrestlers were just the greatest guys, and I think matter of fact, certain Tuesdays I should call Mike George up and see if he wants to have lunch some Tuesday just for old times, because we did it. I mean, we were, and the thing about Bob Geigel is he knew where every hole in the wall restaurant, places we had never heard about, he'd give us directions to. He said, "You got to try this place. You got to try this." He knew, and when we would go in, the waitresses to him, people would ask him for his autograph. When we sit there, and this was like 20 years after he stopped wrestling.
Sure.
We would go from, and he'd say, I mean, we'd go to the casinos that we were competing against and eat lunch there, and Bob would say, "I don't know if this buffet is as good as it was. Randy, are we coming here next week or not?"
So some things I wanted to ask you about Bob, though. Did you ever go to the Tender Trap?
No. He told me about it, though. He said it was unbelievable. He said, here's what Kansas City needs to do. He and I would have a running argument. I would say we need to have a downtown arena. And he said, "I don't want a downtown arena. I don't want to pay for some make some sports mogul a lot of money. But I knew that was the spoke that the downtown needed, something to draw people downtown. He said, bras and booze, broads and booze, Randy. That's what they need. Then he told me about the Tender Trap and how wild that place was.
Well, Schatz was telling a story. She was telling stories about how, like, she's like, yeah, there were some cockroaches there a lot, and like it was. I mean, stuff that, like, well, thank God the health department didn't know about that then. But I mean, I can only imagine when that's when. Guys weren't making so much money like athletes do now, where they had like secondary things like that, and they were actually, actually working there sometimes.
Oh yeah. Bob owned that place and had a great time with it. And in those days, it's hard for people to imagine before the internet. There weren't a million other choices of stuff. Now I feel sorry for someone trying to get a niche, a young person. I don't know how anybody finds you.
The pie is split a lot. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, it's. So they owned the wrestling, which was a huge draw on television every weekend. So whatever business came from that, it was wonderful. Bill Kirsten, who was the announcer, was an old friend of ours. He used to come Tuesday to lunch. Bill told me how it changed his love for wrestling. I mean, wherever he goes, I when I was announcing for the Kansas City T-Bones, doing their PA, I had him come out. Bill threw out the first pitch, and then I had him say, "Hello, wrestling fans," and people went crazy.
And that was his catchphrase. Yes,
that was his catchphrase, and so Kirsten told me one night he's driving back to Kansas City with Andre the Giant, and a bunch of young people are giving Andre a hard time because he beat the guy they were rooting for in the wrestling match. So they followed him up I-35 coming back to Kansas City. And he says, "Mr. Bill, pull over the car." Because they were going up alongside him, and it was getting dangerous. They're yelling out the window, hey, Andre, you this type of stuff. Just giving him a hard time. And he takes off his pants, puts his rear end up against the window and moons them.
That had to have been a pretty big window.
Oh, that was a big window. And Bill Kirsten said they laughed all the way up to Kansas City. Thank you, Mr. Bill. Thank you for doing that. The characters were just, and there were some sad stories, like people that had legal problems, people that had money problems. Once wrestling kind of wound down, once it went on cable, which people forget. Before cable, the local wrestling was the deal. It was a big deal.
I mean, that's why people don't understand. Like, people now today that have seen WWF, WWE on internationally for decades now, they don't understand that it doesn't matter that someone looks at Bulldog Bob Brown and says, "Well, he's just like a short, fat guy," But it didn't matter. He was a huge star to the people that grew up here.
So he knew how to play a crowd. He knew how to play the crowd. That's what it was. Now it wasn't. It was fun stuff. It was one of the things I knew of the history of wrestling, which is why I love your show, Casey on the Mat. And I knew in the 50s, my grandmother used to watch Gorgeous George. He had hairpins and that. He was
flamboyant,
flamboyant and this type of thing. And so I thought it was funny since Mike George was there. I called him Gorgeous Mike George.
Which he is nothing like Gorgeous George.
Everybody thought he was the real Gorgeous George.
Oh man, I bet he loved that.
Poor Mike! I used to get him every night and say, "Well," and I named the wrestlers they could meet after the races. I said, "Don't forget, Gorgeous Mike George is at the top of the escalator. if you'd like to meet him tonight." And I said, I got to tell you this, friends. Gorgeous Mike George has guarded that escalator for 15, 20 years. We've had terrorism all over the world, and not one person has stolen that escalator. And all the time, Mike has been there.
Yeah, Mike. And if you know Mike George, he's a man's man. So calling him gorgeous is definitely gonna make him turn red a little bit.
Oh, he tried to set me up. He had his wife at the time tried to set me up with some gals, and I said, "Oh, no," it was like. But anyway, I met a beautiful gal years later. I've been married for 18, 20 years now, and it's all been great. And so, God looks out for you. But boy, when you're working, I will tell you this, when you're working 80, 90 hours a week, and we were doing 9 performances a week at the Woodlands.
Yeah.
Our only day off was Tuesday, and we all loved each other so much from working at that place. We all had to get together Tuesday for lunch somewhere. So here we are, where you got 9 performances a week. And then when they went year round to try to support the horses, which weren't doing well, that's when I had to drop back and drop out of it a little bit because, I had 3 months. It was always like being a kid in school. You went 9 months a year, and then you had 3 months off, and then you rejuvenate yourself, get caught up in your sleep, and then
Sure.
you come back in September and you do it all over again. And but it was when you work at a schedule like that. But if I don't do all of that, I have what I'm doing now on BigJackWithBetty.net. So
Sure.
it all turned all
Couple-
turned out for the best. And I couldn't. The fun thing about it is I couldn't say no to the Woodlands, but nobody at the Woodlands except the people in the front office had any kind of benefits. So I kept renewing my radio station contract so I could have health insurance for my family.
Sure.
And all of these things. So what I really love to do wouldn't totally take care of me, but it's something I didn't want to let go. And I held on to it as long as I could. And then I went back to 3 performances a week. But I still see all the wrestlers, Bob Geigel.
I was going to say, no one held on to the Woodlands longer than Bob Geigel. Okay.
Oh, he was there. He was there literally to the very end. Yes, he was. And he used to tell me, he said, you know why they're taxing us? He said, these casino people are taxing us. And I go, why? He goes, Randy, you know as well as I do, we would beat them. If we had slot machines and live racing, we had more outlets for people. We would beat them. And they of course, one of them owns Riverside and also KCK. So, that what it came down to is our owner who had more money wouldn't buy lawmakers, and their owner did. That's really what it came down to.
And to see Bob there at the end, like you said, he was there. I would go see him and interview him there, and he was at this little guard shack out there, and he is 85, right. 87 years old. I mean, pretty amazing, man. But
he worked, and Bob didn't have to work.
I was going to say, did he ever tell you? Did he do this to have purpose? Like, did he ever tell you why he kept doing it? Did you ever ask him?
Yes, because he loved people. And he loved doing the right thing, and to him, doing the right thing was to keep the Woodlands going. We had, for the people that worked there, we had an emotional attachment to each other. We'd go to when people would die at the racetrack, everybody would be there. When people's family members were married, it wasn't just a place we went and spent a few hours. We loved each other. I could definitely say that. There's no two ways about it, because part of something that was brand new, it made tons of money, and then we saw people trying to pull it away from us, and so it was a cause as much as anything else. It was doggone it, they're coming after my family member. They're doing that. You do stuff with people, and that's why I probably shouldn't even mention the Bob Geigel how it ended story, but I will tell you this: you could be corrupt. You can take people's money and drive people out of business and take away their livelihoods. But when you literally put a person in that position who's 80-some years old, boy, you could live with that. I certainly could. But that's the way it is.
That's a tragedy. It was a tragedy the way it ended for him.
And again, the more people you were the only guy in the media, and this kind of bothered me a bit because I was in the media for years, and I knew all the media people. And I'd promote all these people at the racetrack. When somebody was there, I'd say, this person's here, might be the greatest announcer ever, all of these things. And when I needed them to get behind us, to put pressure on lawmakers to even the tax, and that's all they wanted, was the same tax for the same state-owned slot machines. That's all they wanted. There was no more than that. I couldn't get anybody to do stories on it or rally about it. You were the only guy. You were the only guy. All the people I knew, all the people I helped along the way.
Well, I'd hate to sound cynical, but that's pretty normal, as you know. So.
Oh yeah, and they're all concerned about their passes at the NASCAR.
They don't want to tick off the wrong people when they're in the middle of everything.
Yeah, but as a journalist, when you see a wrong like that, you have to do it.
I wanted to do something on the Woodlands, just like the same reason I wanted to do Casey on the Mat, just for nostalgic purposes, and that's all my own selfish thing, really. But people,
but no, it's you did the perfect thing, because these people need to be remembered. These were important people. These weren't just these guys. The guys, like, they paved the way for all of us. All of these people did.
They did,
So-
and
so-
one
so,
reason
you know,
when I look at it now, and I'm glad it still lives on YouTube. So does Fun on the Run. They all are up there
Yeah.
forever. But when I look at Casey on the Mat, I did that when I was pretty young, and I look, like anything you did when you were younger, you're like, man, I could have done it so much better now. But the problem was, they were all passing away. That's why I really wanted to do it, because I'm like, these guys, they start hitting their 60s, 70s, and in wrestling years, that's like, it's like dog years. So you're like, I don't know how long. And as we've seen now, it's only been less than 15 years since that came out, and they're all gone, most of them.
Oh yeah, some of them. Bob Geigel, amazingly, toward the end, was healthy as a horse.
He was.
He always said he ate a lot of garlic. He'd say, Randy, eat a lot of garlic.
That's the key.
Okay. He was out, but boy, some of our friends, like Harley Race, was just last time. Oh,
well, what about Harley Race? Did you have much interaction with him at all?
Just at the Tuesday lunches.
Okay.
He was at the racetrack just a few times, and I watched him, of course, when I was a kid.
Sure.
He had the great left jab, and boy, he was, the Harley Race story. I mean, he survived a deadly accident coming back from wrestling match. And it's his toughness. They said he lose his leg. He almost lost his leg.
Mm-hmm.
And his toughness. There might have been better wrestlers over the years, but there was nobody tougher than Harley Race, man.
You're absolutely right, and he's known for that, and he's known as the guy you never want to mess with.
And his left jab, certain things I remember. I used to kid Rufus R. Jones. His deal was his head, his cocoa butt.
Uh-huh.
He called his cocoa butt, and he rammed people with his head, and it was funny. And he also would wear these white trunks in the ring, and he was an African American great guy. And he'd wear these white trunks in the ring, and he'd start doing the twist while he was in the ring. He was just another story. Bob Geigel said he was doing the Children's Miracle Network live on television. They had a live remote where they're collecting money, a telethon. So Geigel shows up to try to promote the thing. Bob, could you come out? And Bob says, sure. So he gets a guy there who thinks wrestling is fake. As the host, he said, Bob, isn't that fake? And of course it's set up, as you know, it is set up to have certain people do well.
It's predetermined, sure.
Yeah, predetermined, but a lot of the wrestling's very real. I mean, the stuff. And Bob Geigel says, sure, it's real. He says, I saw you gave somebody a sleeper hold one time. He says, yeah. He said, I could put you in a sleeper hold right now on live television if you'd like.
Oh, no.
And the guy said, oh, come on. And Geigel said, I looked at him, he had a perfect chicken neck. He said, if you had a long chicken neck, that's how Bob described it. He said, I told the people, if you give some money, I will put him in a sleeper hold right now. And the money started rolling in, and Bob puts sleeper hold on live television. The guy pees his pants. He said, he falls to the floor. There was another guy at the Woodlands that went up to Bulldog Bob Brown, an employee who worked in valet parking. And Ted goes up to Bulldog Bob Brown and said, that was fake. That was fake. And Bulldog gives him a slap to the throat and knocks his Adam's apple in the back of his throat. He says, is that fake? Is that real to you?
now the Bulldog would be sued to death. So
but we didn't care. We didn't care. It was all part of you captured it. The atmosphere at the Woodlands, the carnival atmosphere was the real. And I was so lucky to be the guy that gets to stir the pot.
Oh my gosh, yes.
To be the guy. All I had to do was just know everybody, which was wonderful. You go from table to table. This person's here tonight. This person's here, and of course the wrestlers. Everybody knew who they were. So it was like a wrestling museum. And the guy that made that possible was Al Myers, former Kansas City, Kansas police chief, and he knew all the wrestlers because every Thursday night at Memorial Hall he provided security.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So he's the guy who ran security that brought all the wrestlers in. It was an ingenious idea.
I had no idea that was why. Interesting.
That's why. Alan Myers did all of that. Alan was a good guy. He's called Smiling Al. I go down, you see his $1 million smile. I had a little saying for every person. I even had every waitress had their nickname, and it was just it was insane.
Hey, it's more fun that way. You personalize everything, and that's
yes,
very fun.
And then what happens is your audience, and it happened in wrestling. Your audience has an emotional tie to you.
Yeah.
You're more than just someone they put $10 down for a ticket for. No, this person knows me. This person cares
It's
about
like a family.
this person. Yes, yes. And then you have something. I try to do that with my internet show too, and I always did that in radio. Just pretend there's one person there. There's one person there. But the beautiful thing about the Woodlands and what I'm doing now on BigJackWithBetty.net is that person, you know that person. You know you're making that person happy instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, that's a really great deal.
No, you've been great at that for many decades, Randy.
Oh, it's just been, I've been very lucky, very blessed, and Miss Birch keeps telling me, "Or when are you going to retire?" And I said, I tell my players this: I would like to retire, but after 46 years of broadcasting, I've never really worked, so I don't know. It gives me purpose. I think all the time. I make people happy, and gosh, if you're able to do that, and I had some tough times as a kid due to family situations and that. So I always have this thing where the wolf could always be at the door.
Sure.
So I have this stuff where you never can make too much money.
No, I think that sounds and I think purpose is the biggest thing. I mean, like I've had after having a father who retired pretty early, and then after 6 months he was bored, and then he lost purpose too.
Oh yeah, you do. And your mind. The beautiful thing about the I call them the odd squad, because they're some of the oddest people in the world, but I just love them. I call them the odd squad, and they love I now do all these other things with them. I mean, there's not a moment. I do fantasy. I do fantasy baseball. The draft is Monday. We did fantasy football, fantasy basketball. I do fantasy golf with these people, where we put money in the pool. I mean, it's like a fraternity. And the frat party never stops. Sometimes I wish it would. I mean, I'll be sitting there having lunch and say, "Hey, Randy, did you hear about this? You ought to mention this on your show tonight." And I was like, "Oh, geez," But the only bizarre thing about what I do, and it's a wonderful thing, really, is since 2010 I started doing this in Hollywood on the internet. I don't have anybody to give it to. The only way I could do it is have you stay at my house, Chris, and show you how to use all the equipment and all the computer stuff. But because we invented this, I don't. So when I go on vacation, like my grandson's graduating in Denver in May, I'm going to go to his graduation that afternoon, and I'll be back in the hotel room. We're ready to do a live show at 6:00.
Oh, wow.
It's just like this. It's like that all the time. It's like but I also know that we're lifting up handles, bringing in millions of dollars, and people are, like they're doing with other things. You have all the animal rights people. They're after the horse racing industry. They shut down the circus.
Sure.
And so you're doing a good thing. Because the animals are treated beautifully, and that's what they love to do. And but you have all these people that are trying to put you out of business. So I look at it as I'm helping some people, farmers that raise animals, people that are good people, that are doing the right thing. They love the animals. They're all adopted, and I'm preserving their way of life. I'm kind of like you were with wrestling. You were not only canonizing it, but you were helping preserve it. I mean, it's something that we need, that the people need to know that existed and this type of thing. And it's a wonderful thing you do. I love this. I love the stuff you do. And Casey on the Mat was just classic. I watched Bill Grigsby, and of course, Bill Grigsby, I knew every story he ever told.
Bill Grigsby, he may have as many stories as you. He was a man of good Lord.
He would come out a typical Saturday for a while. I would get done doing a matinee, and he would have me come to the sports show, and he'd have me do duck races. And he'd have these ducks lined up, and I do duck races. And then I'd go back and do the evening show. I mean, we did stuff like that. Greg's all the time. I mean, he had one day he calls me up. He said, "Randy, I want you to talk to the general manager. Pete Enoch and I are going to get the sports talk show going at this little station, and we need your help to do this." And so we all met at Jazz, and Vic, of course, who owns Jazz, loved Bill and loved the Woodlands. Matter of fact, we had it all set up. He was going to do a shuttle system to shuttle people over from Jazz Restaurant and the Legends over to the Woodlands. He was going to have a free shuttle bus service. He was going to do that. We gave away gift certificates to Jazz.
Oh, I love Jazz. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but we were all part of a community, and the thing about the internet is everything is local now. Everything is. It's hard to have those niche businesses where people want to go to. Yeah, movie theaters are dealing with it now too. People don't go to movies because they
Sure.
sit there and watch it out. Same type of thing. But people are missing out. And wrestling on Thursday nights in this town at Memorial Hall was a religion.
It
It
was.
was it was something that you couldn't get any other place. You and the characters, the wrestlers were bigger than life. I mean, when I went up, Bob Geigel went in the Hall of Fame in Newton, Iowa. The Wrestling Hall of Fame is in all places, Newton, Iowa. It's a great place. Have you ever been there?
I haven't. It was Newton, and then is it in Waterloo now? Because it's like
It might be. It
I
might.
think it might have moved, but when
But in
when he was up
2000
there, that was
Yeah,
where it was.
2003, it was in Newton, Iowa. And they're up getting in the Hall of Fame. I saw Greg Gagne, Bob Geigel, and who was the guy with the iron claw? Oh, Baron von Raschke.
Raschke, yeah.
Baron von Raschke up there, personally friend, the wrestler who had the suitcase full of bricks he'd hit over people's heads.
Oh yeah.
He was there. So it was like, so I drive, and this is so Bob Geigel. I drive up Kansas City to Newton, which is about 4 hours, because he said, Randy, you better be there. I'm going to the Hall of Fame. I said, yeah, I'll be there, Bob. I'll be there. So I drove up. It was a Saturday, and I get up there, and all these people speak and tell these beautiful stories. Bob Geigel gets up there, and I swear to God, he says, I just thank all you people for having me here and to be in the Hall of Fame. And he said, all I could say to all of it is I'd like to thank my mother for having me. And then he sits down. I said, U.S., there was shots and all the family. I said, you SOB, I have 4 hours and you say, I want to thank my mom for having me.
One sentence, that's what I came up here for? Oh, yeah. Oh, my God.
But the stories, the stories of the wrestling was, and they had a fraternity. I mean, they had the wrestlers, they loved each other, and they all loved Bob Geigel because they knew Bob was looking out for them.
They did. He's known as a pretty just a down to earth guy, which can be taken and construed as a simple man. But he was just like he was very smart.
He was dumb as a fox. Don't kid yourself. He owned land. He was Texas Bob Geigel when he was down in Texas. He owned land down there. He made some wise investments. Bob was a very smart man. Very smart.
So I have to ask you one more question.
But he didn't like evil people trying to screw people.
Of course.
He didn't like that. And that's why you asked me why he stayed at the Woodlands so long. He saw the evil that these people were trying to do to the Woodlands by taxing them out of business. It meant something. It meant something to him. You're trying to take away my family, type of thing. You understand? Yeah. He fought tooth and nail with the folks, the Vince McMahon. I mean, he told me he went over to St. Louis and tried to cut a deal. Vince McMahon tried to buy them out, and then he wanted to. He would pay him 3 months, and then cut them all loose. And Bob wasn't going to do that to his friends. He wasn't going to do that. So
sure,
Bob tried to keep it going, but the inevitability of it, as you know, was cable television would have it on for free for 4 nights a week, and they'd have all the best wrestlers. Why would they go to Memorial Hall and watch it when they could sit in their house and watch it 3-4 times a week? And that was and of course in the 90s, you remember, wrestling television cable was huge.
Oh, I mean, I was working there during the highlight of it. It was they were hitting like 9 and 10s on the ratings during Raw.
Oh yeah. They owned it at night. And so Bob in his own way would say, Vince McMahon might have been a little smarter than Bob Geigel. He'd always talk about himself in third person. See, he may have been a little smarter than Bob Geigel, but he was still an asshole.
I got to ask you one more question before I let you go, Randy. Yeah. Did you ever get to go into the museum or the house that he lived in for 60 years, and in his basement he had his walls lined with autographed pictures of everyone? Did you ever get to go in Bob's house?
Oh, yes, I did.
He was so proud of...
He was so proud. He took me through all of it. Here, one of the sad deals, there was a house. I was looking to buy a house, and there's a house right across from his. He took me there for lunch. He had all kinds of memorabilia. Just, I don't know what happened to all of that, but for a wrestling fan, they would love that stuff. I don't know, but Bob, every week, Randy, that house is still for sale across from me. He lived north of the river. and off 56th Street up there, and he'd say that house across the street is still. Are you going to buy that house or not? And I did have the heart to tell him that I didn't want to. I wanted to buy at a place that the property, where the value is going to grow. So I ended up buying a house over in Western Johnson County.
Sure.
It was a good investment. It was a great investment. But, it's hard when your friend wants you to live across the street and you can't tell him, well, Bob, I don't want to do this because I'm going to lose value on it.
Bob, you live in a horrible neighborhood, Bob. I don't want to live there.
He was determined to get me one day at lunch. We're out there. You want to go over and look at that place again, Randy? I had my wife there. We walked through it. And so that, and if you missed a Tuesday lunch with Bob, Randy, you abandoned me. He'd call me up. You abandoned me. Are we going to get together? And especially when it was really, when I started Big Jackpot for Track Data, I was working at, up to eight, 9 racetracks.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was on all the time. And I didn't have the heart to tell Bob, how do you explain to somebody who's never been in the chat room all the stuff you're trying to do?
Oh yeah.
You can't explain that to him. So we'd get together other times, but sadly I didn't get to see him that much toward the end. But as I told one person who interviewed me about him, I can definitely say I had more lunches with Bob Geigel than I did my own mother. I had more lunches with him, but that was his big deal. So his family put together lunch, and I told stories about Bob at the lunch, and we all got together. We all had a million stories, and normally it was about the same thing. He would help you in any way he could. He would help you. I remember when I went to buy this house after I told him I wasn't going to buy the house across the street from him. So, Randy, you need some money for that? He said, you need $8-10 you come to Bob Geigel. I'll help you do it. That's the way he was. That's the way he was. And anybody who knew him knows exactly I'm telling the truth.
No, he was a great guy.
Oh man, I mean, and the stories he told, he saw a lot in his lifetime. I mean, he was on the a ship when Harry Truman dropped the bomb in 1945. Bob was offshore in Japan, was sitting on a ship. He was part of the invasion crew. He would have been Bob. He said, not for Harry Truman, there might not have been a Bob Geigel. Because he was literally on a ship on the invasion force, and then of course he was a farm kid from Algona, Iowa, and his dad didn't want to have him wrestle because he worked at the farm.
Mm-hmm.
And a college coach, a high school coach, first came out and talked his dad into it. He said, "Well, if he can get his chores done, he can do it." And Bob ended up wrestling. He was an All-American at the University of Iowa. He was All-American football player. He was drafted by the Chicago Cardinals, but people don't realize in the 1950s, wrestling was much bigger than professional football. So Bob could make more money wrestling every week than he could playing professional football. So Bob chose wrestling over that, and the people he knew in his lifetime. I always thought, and I never could get Bob interested in this, but I wanted to sit down and write a book about him, because he had such an unbelievable life. I mean, just unreal. The stuff he encountered. But you wish you could do a lot of things you never get to when you get busy. But he was sure a great friend. He was a great friend. Rufus R. Jones was as nice a man as you'd ever meet in your life. Every Sunday, his wife Brooksy would bring a sweet potato pie, and we'd all gather down in the security office to have a slice of sweet potato pie that Brooksy would make. And that's the way it was. That's the way it was all the time. We'd have up on the roof on Kentucky Derby days, and that we'd have a potluck up on the roof, and everybody bring a dish. And of course, I ended up going buying something somewhere because I couldn't cook a damn thing. So but we did. There was that sense of community with the wrestlers, especially that it was a great thing. And the other thing that was interesting about it. And this might have been an Al Myers idea, I don't know. But he always had the wrestlers in the same spot every day. Every day you would come in, and you knew that Bob Geigel would be against that north wall. You knew that Rufus R. Jones would be sitting. You knew that Mike George was at the end of the escalator. So for the fans, these are people we watch in the ring, and now they're sitting there. And I know where he is. I'll take you. I know him. I'll introduce you to him. I'll take you to him. and so it set up this sense of community that was wonderful. And the wrestlers were, and you can, the gambling was big. I had a lot of fun with it, and the people loved the dogs, and people loved the atmosphere and fun. But the wrestlers were a big part of the success of that place. For about, I mean, there were, and it was the same. It was the same reason I loved them, because I remembered being that little kid that would watch him on a Saturday morning, and suddenly these bigger than life characters are Randy's friend. Let's go get a beer, Randy. Let's go do. Oh, it was just wonderful.
Well, Randy,
they were just great friends, and God, I miss them all. And I'm glad you mentioned Mike. I need to call him over to the casino and have lunch with him one of these days.
You should have a Tuesday lunch with him in memory of Bob.
Tuesday lunches has to be. I've had him on my internet show, and I will tell you, when I put Mike George on my internet show, the chat room fills up and people have a million questions for him. I've had him on a couple times. And there's all the old wrestling fans. There's something about sports. If you're into one sport, you're usually into other things. The guys that are dog racing fans or wrestling fans. Mm-hmm. And Mike has, of course, his mind is very sharp. Mm-hmm. And it makes him sad because all of his friends from that era are gone.
They are.
All of them are. The Viking, all of them are gone. And so I need to get a hold of him. And he's a great guy. He's a great guy. And I'll tell you what, he sat by that escalator for 18 years in the Woodlands. Every time I saw him, I could definitely say no one tried to steal that escalator. We had people come that were threats to the Woodlands, but Mike guarded that escalator just beautifully. He said, "You're not going to talk about me in the escalator again today." I said, "Mike, I might have to get it in once or twice." I always had that thing. Whenever a gambler would get mad at me or whatever, I'd say, "Well, you can say that, but I want you to know something. I've got 7,000 people here tonight, and I'm going to have the microphone all night. So you can say whatever you want, but I want you to remember that."
Yep, you wield a powerful weapon there, that's for sure. Well, Randy, I appreciate the memories, and thanks for joining us this week.
Sorry, I probably drug on with all the stories, but I love what you did with Casey and the Mat. I love what you did with the Fun of the Run. I can't thank you enough for that. A lot of people, hundreds of thousands. If you look, it says over 100,000 hits on YouTube. A lot of people watch that. I wish it. At the time, it was a perfect vehicle. But when people are bought off and corrupt, there's really nothing you can do about it.
I appreciate your kind words, Randy.
All right. Thank you, my friend, and great to talk to you again.
You too, buddy.
It's the worst territory.
Well, there you have it, the interview with my friend Randy Burch, and he had a lot to say, obviously, about the Woodlands Racetrack, about his friendship with Bob Geigel, and just love going down memory lane with Randy about just not only professional wrestling, but the Woodlands, because, again, if you grew up in the 90s in Kansas City, you definitely knew all about the Woodlands Racetrack. I want to thank Gabe Miller for providing nothing in this show. Hopefully he'll be back next time and he can help edit some of this or something. But thanks a lot for listening to another episode of The Worst Territory in the World. We'll have more coming up on professional wrestling in Kansas City and the rest of the Central States area then and now on future episodes. I am Chris Goff. We'll see you next time.
It's the worst territory in